Subscribe for more thrilling stories like this. Dark tension, high stakes, and unforgettable characters. Rain fell like it had something to prove, drumming hard against the streets of downtown Chicago. Red and blue lights cut through the night, bouncing off wet asphalt and glass towers. Detective Maya Carter stepped out of her unmarked car, coat pulled tight, pulse steady. She had chased this moment for 3 years, 3 years of dead ends, informants who vanished, and threats that came wrapped in silk politeness. Tonight it ended. Inside the abandoned riverfront warehouse, the air smelled of metal and oil. Maya moved with her team, boots silent, weapons steady. Every step echoed with memories of the name that haunted her case files, Lucian Moretti. The man was a ghost wrapped in money and myth, the kind of boss who never touched the crime, never left fingerprints, never raised his voice. They said he smiled when things went wrong. They said he always won. "Clear," someone whispered over comms. Maya pushed open the office door at the back. One light burned over a desk. A man stood by the window, hands resting casually at his sides, watching the police lights paint the river below. He turned before she spoke. Lucian Moretti didn't look surprised. He looked amused. "Detective Carter," he said calmly, his voice smooth, American with a trace of something old world beneath it. "You're right on time." Maya raised her gun, hands where I can see them. He complied slowly, lifting his hands, palms open. His suit was immaculate despite the rain, dark hair neatly combed, eyes sharp and unsettlingly warm. "You're under arrest," she said. "Conspiracy, racketeering, trafficking." "I know the list," Lucian interrupted gently. "I helped write half of it." Her jaw tightened. She stepped forward, snapping the cuffs onto his wrists with a final click that echoed in the room. That's when he leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "This isn't over." The words weren't a threat, they were a promise. Maya met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "It is for you." Lucian smiled. The ride to Holding was tense. Lucian sat quietly in the back of the cruiser, eyes focused on the city passing by, as if he were studying a painting he owned. Maya rode up front, replaying every detail, every step, making sure there was no mistake. They had him, finally. At the station, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Lucian walked calmly, chin high, like a man attending a gala instead of his own downfall. As he passed Maya, he paused just long enough to say, "You did well tonight." She didn't answer. Inside the interrogation room, the air was cold, sterile. Maya sat across from him, file open, recorder on. "Let's skip the games," she said. "You're finished, we have witnesses, financial trails. This time you're not walking away." Lucian leaned back, cuffs resting against the table. "You think this is my first storm, detective?" "This one's different." He studied her, really looked at her, as if memorizing something important. "You believe that?" She felt a flicker of irritation. "You don't scare me." "No," he said softly. "I don't." The door opened. A uniformed officer whispered something to Maya. Her expression shifted, confusion, then disbelief. "What do you mean, bail?" she snapped. "That's impossible." Lucian's smile returned, slow and knowing. An hour later, Maya stood frozen as Lucian walked free, coat back on, cuffs gone. Lawyers surrounded him. The charges hadn't vanished, but they were delayed, tangled in legal maneuvers she hadn't seen coming. As he passed her again, he stopped. "I told you," he murmured. "This isn't over." Then he walked out into the night. Days passed. Maya barely slept. She dug deeper, chasing leads, pushing her team harder. But everywhere she turned, doors closed. Witnesses recanted. Evidence blurred. Lucian's shadow stretched further than she imagined. Then the messages started. A single white rose on her car. An envelope with no return address, inside. A photo of the warehouse from the night of the arrest, taken from an angle only someone watching could have captured. And finally, a phone call. Unknown number. She answered, "Detective Carter." "Relax," Lucian said on the other end, calm as ever. "I'm not calling to threaten you." "Then don't call," she snapped. A pause, then "You fascinate me." She hung up, but her hands were shaking. That evening, Maya stood alone in her apartment, city lights glowing through the window. She replayed his words in her mind, the way he'd looked at her, like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. She hated that it unsettled her. Across the city, Lucian Moretti stood on a balcony overlooking the river, phone in hand, a faint smile on his lips. "She put me in handcuffs," he said to no one in particular. "That takes courage." Behind him, his world moved silently, loyal and lethal. "And courage," he added, eyes darkening, "should never go unrewarded." The game had begun. Maya Carter learned quickly that arresting Lucian Moretti had not weakened him. It had shifted the battlefield. The city felt different now, heavier, as if something invisible moved just beneath the surface. At headquarters, conversations stopped when she walked by. Leads she requested came back thin or useless. Even her captain avoided eye contact, offering vague reassurances about procedure and timing. Maya had spent her career trusting facts, paper trails, the slow grind of justice. But Lucian operated in spaces the law struggled to reach, where influence wore clean suits and smiled politely while pulling strings. She refused to let that stop her. Every night she stayed late, rereading files, mapping connections, rebuilding the case piece by piece. If he thought freedom meant victory, he was wrong. Outside the precinct, the pressure grew subtler. Maya noticed the same black sedan parked across the street 2 nights in a row. When she changed routes home, it disappeared. Her favorite coffee shop greeted her with a free drink she hadn't ordered. A stranger on the subway moved just enough to block a man who had been staring too hard. None of it was overt. None of it crossed a clear line. That was the worst part. Lucian wasn't attacking, he was circling. And somehow, that felt more dangerous. One evening, after another dead-end meeting with prosecutors, Maya received an invitation. No envelope this time. Just a text with an address, a time, and 3 words, "You should come." She deleted it, then stopped. The address was a public place, a charity gala at a downtown hotel, heavily secured, crawling with cameras and donors. It was the kind of event Lucian used to attend before his name became headline poison. Against her better judgment, she went. She told herself it was surveillance, that knowledge was power. She told herself a lot of things. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers and soft music. Maya stood near the back, badge hidden, eyes scanning the crowd. Then she saw him. Lucian stood near the bar, relaxed, perfectly at ease, dressed in a tailored suit that fit like it was made for him, which it probably was. People laughed near him, unaware or unconcerned with who he was rumored to be. When his eyes met hers, he didn't smile. He simply waited. After a long moment, Maya walked over. "You're bold," she said quietly. "You came," he replied. "That makes 2 of us." She didn't sit. "Why am I here?" Lucian gestured around them. "To see the world you're fighting. Money, influence, appearances, you think justice lives here." He leaned closer, voice low. "It lives where people are willing to bleed for it." "I'm not your audience," Maya said. "I disagree." His gaze sharpened. "You could have stayed home, you didn't." Before she could answer, a commotion rippled through the room. Security moved fast. Someone shouted. Maya's instincts kicked in as a man pushed through the crowd, hand reaching inside his jacket. The shot never came. Lucian reacted first, grabbing Maya's arm and pulling her down just as glass shattered overhead. Chaos exploded. People screamed. Alarms blared. Minutes later, police swarmed the ballroom. The threat was gone, an unstable man with a fake weapon, detained quickly. But Maya's pulse thundered as she realized Lucian's hand was still on her wrist. She pulled away. "Don't," she snapped. Lucian studied her, expression unreadable. "You could have been hurt." "I don't need your protection." "No," he said softly, "you don't." The words lingered between them, heavier than they should have been. After the gala, Maya walked alone into the cool night air. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You still think this is about control." "It's not." She didn't reply. She couldn't stop thinking about the moment Lucian had moved without hesitation, instinctively shielding her. It didn't erase what he was. It complicated it. The next morning brought a new development. One of Maya's key witnesses, an accountant who had quietly agreed to testify, was found dead, apparent overdose. The timing was too clean, the circumstances too convenient. Maya slammed her fist on her desk. This was the cost of the game Lucian played. People disappeared, truths buried with them. She felt anger burn hot and sharp, directed straight at him. That night, she confronted him. She didn't know how she knew where to find him, only that she did. A private lounge overlooking the river, quiet and exclusive. Lucian wasn't surprised to see her storm in. "You're responsible," she said, voice shaking with rage. "Don't deny it." Lucian stood slowly. "I didn't order that." "I don't care." "You should," he said, "because if I wanted him silenced, you wouldn't be standing here." She stepped closer, eyes blazing. "People die around you." "Yes," he admitted, "and so do people around you. The difference is I don't pretend my hands are clean." The words hit harder than she expected. Silence stretched. Lucian's gaze softened, not with pity, but with something like understanding. "You're trying to save a system that doesn't know your name," he said, "and yet you keep fighting." "I don't need your approval." "I know," a pause. "That's why you matter." Maya turned away, jaw tight. She hated that a part of her heard truth in his words. Hated that the line between enemy and something else felt thinner than before. As she left, Lucian watched her go, a dangerous calm settling over him. He had seen fear in many eyes, greed, hatred, desire. But Maya Carter carried conviction like a weapon, and it fascinated him more than he wanted to admit. Outside, the river reflected the city lights, restless and dark. And somewhere between law and chaos, two forces moved closer, drawn together not by trust, but by a tension neither could ignore. The game was no longer just about winning. It was about what they were willing to become. Maya Carter stopped believing in coincidence the night her apartment was broken into and nothing was taken. No forced locks, no shattered glass, no mess. Just the quiet certainty that someone had been inside her space, breathing the same air, touching nothing yet leaving everything changed. She stood in the doorway for a long time, gun in hand, listening to the hum of the city outside and the echo of her own pulse. This wasn't a warning. It was a reminder. Lucian's world didn't need to threaten her directly. It simply needed to let her know how close it could get. At work, the pressure intensified. Internal Affairs opened a routine inquiry into her conduct at the gala. Her captain pulled her aside, voice low, eyes wary, advising her to keep her distance from Lucian Moretti for her own good. Maya nodded, but inside, anger simmered. Distance wouldn't protect her. Distance was exactly where Lucian had the advantage. If she wanted to understand him, if she wanted to take him down, she had to get closer, even if it meant walking a line that could ruin her career. The next break came unexpectedly. A low-level courier connected to Morty's network was picked up on a weapons charge. The man was young, scared, and desperate enough to talk. He didn't give Maya names, but he gave her patterns, routes, habits, times when Lucian's operations went quiet. It wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough to see the shape of the machine. And it confirmed what she'd suspected. Lucian was pulling back, consolidating, preparing for something big. That kind of move meant risk. It meant exposure. That same night, Maya received another message. "If you want answers, come alone." The location was public again, an all-night diner on the edge of the city, neon lights buzzing, security cameras humming. She told herself she was in control. She wasn't sure she believed it anymore. Lucian was already there, seated in a booth, coffee untouched. He looked less polished tonight, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, the faintest shadow of exhaustion in his eyes. For the first time, he looked human. "You're pushing too hard," he said as she slid into the seat across from him. "People are dying," she replied. "That tends to motivate me." He held her gaze. "You think I enjoy that?" "I think you accept it." A flicker crossed his face, something like regret, gone as quickly as it appeared. "I live in the world as it is," he said, "not as it should be." Maya leaned forward. "Then tell me what you're preparing for." Lucian exhaled slowly. "There's a war coming, not the kind you can arrest your way out of. Old alliances breaking. New players who don't care about rules or consequences. I'm trying to keep the city from burning." She laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "You expect me to believe you're the good guy." "No," he said calmly. "I expect you to believe I'm the devil you know." The honesty unsettled her. He wasn't asking for trust. He was offering perspective, and that was far more dangerous. As they talked, Maya noticed the way people moved around the diner, subtle shifts, calculated distances. Lucian wasn't unprotected, but neither was she. She realized then that if someone wanted her dead tonight, it wouldn't happen. Not here, not with him watching. The thought made her uncomfortable, and she wasn't sure why. When she stood to leave, Lucian said, "You're not like the others." She paused. "Neither are you." Outside, the cold air cleared her head, but not her thoughts. She had crossed a line tonight, not legally, but emotionally. She had listened, and some part of her had understood. The consequences came fast. 2 days later, Maya was suspended pending the IA investigation. Badge surrendered. Gun locked away. The official language was polite, but the message was clear. She was too close to the fire. Sitting alone in her apartment, stripped of the tools that defined her, Maya felt something crack. For the first time since the arrest, fear crept in not of Lucian, but of how easily her world had been destabilized. That evening, there was a knock at her door. She didn't open it at first. She checked the peephole, heart racing. Lucian stood in the hallway, hands visible, expression serious. "I didn't do this," he said when she finally opened the door a fraction. "Being near you ruins everything," she replied. "Yes," he agreed, "it does." She should have closed the door. Instead, she let him in. The apartment felt smaller with him there, charged with unspoken tension. Lucian looked around, taking in the space, the framed academy photo on the wall, the stacks of case files. "You gave up a lot to chase me," he said quietly. "I didn't give it up," she snapped. "It was taken." "And now?" he asked. Maya met his eyes. "Now I figure out how to finish this." Lucian stepped closer, careful, deliberate. "You can't do it alone anymore." "I don't need you." "No," he said, "but you might need the truth." Silence stretched between them, thick and dangerous. Maya felt the pull of it, the urge to step closer, to bridge the distance, to understand the man behind the monster. It scared her more than any gun ever had. Lucian broke the moment, turning toward the door. "Think about what I said," he told her. "The war is coming whether you're ready or not." After he left, Maya sank onto the couch, heart pounding. She hated him. She trusted him. She wanted to destroy him. She wanted to believe him. The lines were no longer just blurred. They were breaking. And once broken, there was no going back. Maya Carter spent the first week of her suspension pretending she was fine, and the second week admitting she wasn't. Because without the badge and the daily rhythm of the precinct, the silence grew loud enough to think in, and thinking was dangerous. She replayed every conversation with Lucian Moretti, every look, every half-truth, wondering where manipulation ended and honesty began. The city didn't pause for her crisis. News reports spoke of rising violence, of crews clashing in neighborhoods that had once been stable, of a shifting underworld that felt less controlled, more reckless. Lucian's warning echoed in her mind like a bruise she couldn't stop pressing. A war was coming. And whether he was protecting his empire or the city itself no longer felt like a simple question. When an encrypted email landed in her inbox from an unknown sender, she knew before opening it who it would be from, and that knowledge alone made her angry enough to consider deleting it. But curiosity won, and with it came a set of documents. Financial ledgers, shipping records, names coded but familiar enough to decode. And a single line beneath them telling her this was only a fragment of what he knew, not a gift but a test. Maya stared at the screen for a long time, understanding the trap. If she used this, she crossed from investigator to accomplice in a game she didn't control. Yet if she didn't, people would keep dying while the system moved too slowly to stop it. She chose a third path, calling in a favor from a retired federal analyst who owed her his career, sharing only enough to spark interest without revealing the source. and watching the first dominoes fall from a distance that was legal but morally uncomfortable. That night, Lucian appeared again, not at her door this time, but on the street outside her building, leaning against a car like a man with nowhere else to be. His presence infuriatingly calm as he told her he knew she'd use the information, and that it meant she was learning to play the long game, a compliment she rejected even as it landed somewhere deep and unwelcome. Their argument was quiet but intense, words clipped and loaded, Maya accusing him of engineering chaos so he could step in as savior, Lucian countering that chaos existed long before him, and that he was merely trying to contain it. And when she demanded to know why he trusted her at all, his answer was simple and unsettling, because she still believed in something bigger than herself, and people like that were rare and dangerous in equal measure. The tension between them tightened when a drive-by shooting erupted half a block away, gunfire cracking the night open and sending civilians running, Lucian pulling Maya behind the car without asking, his body a shield by instinct rather than calculation. And for a brief suspended moment, pressed close with his heartbeat loud against her ear, Maya felt the terrible clarity of understanding that he would die to protect her, and hated that it made her trust him more than she wanted to. After the sirens faded, and the street settled into shaken quiet, Lucian confessed that the shooting hadn't been his, that a new faction was pushing hard and fast, breaking old rules, and that they had already marked Maya's leverage, not because she was weak, but because she mattered to him, a truth that made her recoil even as it explained too much. And when she accused him of dragging her into his war, he answered that the war had chosen her the moment she put him in handcuffs and refused to look away. The next morning brought consequences she couldn't ignore, as her retired contact called to say the data had triggered a federal task force and that her name had surfaced in uncomfortable places, advising her to be careful in a tone that suggested danger had already passed that threshold. And later that day, as if summoned by the weight of the warning, Maya discovered her car tampered with, brake lines cut clean and deliberate, a message written in precision rather than rage. Fear arrived then, cold and focused, not for herself but for what her involvement now meant for anyone near her, and she went to Lucian not for answers, but for protection she despised needing, telling him she wouldn't run and wouldn't hide, only demanded the truth in full, to which he responded by taking her somewhere he had never taken anyone outside his inner circle. A quiet, secure room overlooking the river where maps covered the walls and names were pinned like scars. Laying out the structure of the coming conflict with brutal honesty, and placing his own name among the risks without hesitation. He told her who the new players were, why they didn't care about collateral damage, and why the city would bleed unless someone who understood both law and crime helped stop it. And when Maya accused him of asking her to betray everything she stood for, he replied that he was asking her to redefine it, because justice wasn't always clean and courage rarely safe. And in the silence that followed, charged and heavy, Maya realized the cost of truth wasn't just knowledge but choice, and that by seeing the whole picture. She could no longer pretend neutrality was possible. When she finally left him that night, the river below looked darker than ever, reflecting a city on the edge, and Maya understood that whatever came next would demand a price from them both, because the line between hunter and hunted had collapsed, and in its place stood a fragile, dangerous alliance built not on trust, but on the shared understanding that if they failed, everything would burn. Maya Carter had crossed enough invisible lines to know when one vanished completely, and that realization settled in the pit of her stomach as she stood beside Lucian Moretti in the dim operations room overlooking the river, understanding that whatever they were now doing could no longer be undone. The federal task force was moving faster, pressure building from the top down, while the new faction Lucian had warned her about escalated their moves with ruthless efficiency, hitting supply routes, bribing officials too reckless to keep quiet, and leaving bodies in places designed to provoke panic rather than profit. Maya spent her days analyzing patterns, her nights listening to Lucian explain the underworld's unspoken rules, and somewhere between the maps and the quiet conversations, a dangerous rhythm formed, one built on mutual reliance rather than trust. She still reminded herself daily that he was a criminal, that every calculated kindness might be leverage. Yet when she received a call that her retired contact had gone missing, fear ripped through her sharp enough to make her hands shake, and Lucian was already moving before she finished the sentence, mobilizing people and resources she couldn't legally command, not out of obligation, but because harm to her world now rippled into his. They found the truth hours later in an abandoned parking structure. Not the man himself, but evidence of interrogation. Intimidation meant to send a message. And Maya stood in the echoing concrete silence, fighting the urge to collapse, anger and grief twisting together, as Lucian placed a steadying hand on her shoulder without a word, the gesture intimate in its restraint, and for the first time she didn't pull away. The retaliation came swiftly and without apology, Lucian dismantling a key arm of the rival faction's operation in a way that avoided civilian casualties, but left no doubt about consequences. And Maya watched the reports roll in with a complicated mix of relief and dread, realizing she was now complicit not just emotionally, but strategically, because she understood why he chose each move, and worse, agreed with them. Their alliance tightened under pressure, conversations becoming sharper, more efficient, but also more honest, Lucian admitting the limits of his control and Maya confessing the fear that she might never get her badge back, that even if the task force succeeded, her career would be collateral damage, to which Lucian responded not with false comfort, but with a quiet certainty that she was more than a title, and that the city needed her whether it admitted it or not. That night, exhaustion stripped away their defenses, and in the stillness of the room, the unspoken tension finally surfaced, not as reckless passion, but as a moment of closeness that felt earned and terrifying. A shared breath held too long, Lucian's voice low as he told her that wanting her was the one variable he couldn't control, and Maya's response honest and dangerous as she admitted that having him had been easier than understanding him, and understanding him was the real threat. They didn't cross the final line then, but its presence reshaped everything, making every look heavier, every decision more personal, until the war they were trying to stop reached its breaking point with a coordinated attack designed to force Lucian into the open and expose Maya as his weakness. The message delivered through a direct threat against a public space during a peak hour, calculated to leave them no room to maneuver. Maya's instincts roared to life, planning evacuation routes, leveraging old contacts, pushing the task force into motion with information that stopped just short of revealing Lucian's involvement, while Lucian prepared to draw fire away from the target, fully aware that doing so could cost him his life or his freedom. And when Maya confronted him, furious and afraid, he told her calmly that some lines were worth crossing and some debts couldn't be avoided, especially when innocent lives were at stake. The operation unfolded in brutal, breathless hours, tension coiling tighter with every update, Maya coordinating from the shadows while Lucian stepped into the spotlight as bait, the plan hinging on timing and restraint. And when it worked, when the rival faction was exposed, intercepted, dismantled in a cascade of arrests and seizures, the relief was sharp enough to hurt, yet it was followed immediately by the weight of what they had risked and what still loomed. In the aftermath, as dawn crept over a city that had come too close to disaster, Maya found Lucian alone by the river, the victory hollowed by the knowledge that the task force's net was tightening, that his usefulness had an expiration date, and in the quiet between them, she admitted that she didn't know how to go back to being who she was before, to which he replied that the point of no return wasn't a place but a choice, and they had both made it the moment they decided the city mattered more than their safety. When he took her hand, not as a demand but as an offer, Maya didn't hesitate, understanding that whatever came next would test everything they believed in, because the war might be ending, but the reckoning was just beginning, and love, loyalty, and justice were about to collide in ways neither of them could control. Maya Carter had always believed endings were clean things, lines drawn with authority and finality. But as she stood on the rooftop overlooking the river at sunrise, watching the city breathe in the aftermath of a war it barely understood, she realized endings were just another kind of beginning wearing a disguise. The rival faction was dismantled, its leaders in custody, its network fractured beyond repair, and the federal task force took public credit in a carefully worded press conference that spoke of bravery and cooperation, without nomming the compromises that made victory possible. Maya listened from a distance, suspended no longer but not restored either, her future reduced to quiet meetings and careful evaluations that hinted she might return to service someday, though never in the same way, and she accepted that truth with a steadiness earned through loss. Lucian Moretti, meanwhile, had become the city's worst-kept secret, his name spoken in cautious tones as rumors spread that he had traded information for time, that he had chosen to burn parts of his own empire to prevent something far worse from taking root. And Maya knew how close the task force was now, how narrow the margin he walked between relevance and arrest, because she had helped design it that way. Their final days together were marked not by urgency, but by clarity, conversations stripped of illusion. Lucian acknowledging without bitterness that his world was shrinking, and Maya admitting without apology that if justice demanded his fall, she wouldn't stop it. And what surprised them both was that this truth didn't tear them apart but steadied them, because love, when it finally named itself, didn't ask them to lie about who they were. The reckoning came on a quiet afternoon when Lucian asked her to meet him one last time by the river, the same place where so many of their decisions had been made. And she knew before she arrived what he would say, yet still felt the weight of it settle in her chest as he told her the task force would move soon, that he had arranged his affairs to minimize damage, that he would face what came next on his feet rather than run. Not because he believed in redemption, but because he believed in endings that meant something. Maya argued, not because she thought he was wrong, but because she wasn't ready. And when her voice broke, he stepped closer, resting his forehead against hers in a gesture so gentle it hurt, telling her that she had already changed the city, that some fires only went out because someone was willing to stand close enough to get burned, and that whatever happened to him didn't erase what they had done together. The arrest, when it finally happened days later, was quieter than anyone expected, Lucian surrendering without resistance, his expression calm as the cuffs closed around his wrists once more. And when his eyes found Maya in the crowd of officials and agents, there was no smile this time, only a look of understanding that carried everything they hadn't said, and she held his gaze until he was led away, refusing to let the moment define her by weakness rather than resolve. Months passed, the city settling into a new uneasy balance, Maya returning to work in a different capacity, her badge restored with conditions and watchful eyes. And though the cases she handled were smaller, more contained, she brought to them a depth forged in fire, a knowledge of how fragile order could be and how much courage it took to protect it. Sometimes she walked by the river alone, thinking of Lucian in a place designed to contain men like him, wondering whether the system would hold him or reshape him, knowing only that his choice to stop fighting the inevitable had saved lives and cost him everything else. Letters arrived occasionally, carefully worded, free of sentiment but heavy with meaning, updates on books read, thoughts refined, silences endured, and Maya kept them in a drawer she didn't open often, not because they hurt, but because they reminded her that some connections didn't need constant presence to remain real. On the anniversary of the arrest that had started it all, Maya stood in front of a mirror adjusting her coat, the city reflected behind her, and allowed herself a small, private acknowledgement of the woman she had been and the one she had become, neither innocent nor lost, but sharpened by impossible choices. Outside, the streets moved as they always had, unaware of the quiet sacrifices that kept them turning, and somewhere beyond the river and the walls that now separated them, Lucian Moretti faced his own long reckoning, not as a king or a legend, but as a man who had finally accepted the cost of his power. Maya stepped out into the day with steady purpose, knowing the story between them would never be simple enough to tell in headlines or court records, but it would remain written in the city itself, in the nights that didn't burn and the mornings that arrived intact, proof that even in the space between law and chaos, something like justice could survive, and that sometimes the most important victories weren't about who was captured or who was free, but about what remained standing when everything else fell away.